10 weeks, no arrest, no body, no answers. Somewhere between the darkness of a Tucson desert night and the silence of a family holding its breath, an 84-year-old woman named Nancy Guthrie disappeared, and the investigation meant to find her may have been compromised before it ever truly began. If you're new to the True Crime Report, this is where we go deeper than the headlines, further than the press conferences, and closer to the truth than anyone wants you to get. Subscribe now, because this case is not over, and neither are we. Let's establish what we actually know, because in a case this layered, the confirmed facts matter more than the noise surrounding them. On the night of February 1st, sometime around 2 in the morning, something went very wrong inside and around Nancy Guthrie's home in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona. Nancy is 84 years old. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-host of NBC's Today Show. She had no known enemies. She had lived in this community for decades, surrounded by neighbors, friends, and family who visited regularly. According to the verified timeline released by investigators, at 1:47 a.m., the door camera at the residence disconnected. At 2:12 a.m., motion was detected and images were captured. Images that would later become the cornerstone of this entire investigation. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker, which was connected wirelessly to her cell phone, registered a spike and then disconnected entirely. That pacemaker data is one of the most significant confirmed facts in this case. It places Nancy inside her home after she returned from dinner with her family the night before. It confirms she was alive at a specific point in time. And it tells investigators that something happened to her or her connection to that device at approximately that moment. Her phone was left behind. Her purse was left behind. Her shoes reportedly were not on her feet. The back doors of the home were found propped open. Savannah Guthrie described the moment she received the call from her sister in an emotional interview on Today. She said her first instinct was that their mother had suffered a medical episode and been taken out on a stretcher. That changed the moment she learned the phone and purse were still there. Nothing about that scenario made sense, and she knew it immediately. This was not a woman who wandered off. Nancy Guthrie had limited mobility. According to statements from Savannah that aligned with reporting from sources close to the family, Nancy could not walk to her own mailbox on a regular basis without difficulty. And yet for hours in the early stages of this investigation, the working assumption among some investigators was that an elderly woman may have simply walked away from her home in the middle of the night. That assumption and the time lost to it is at the center of nearly every criticism this investigation has faced. Before we get into what investigators are now working with, we need to talk about the image that changed everything and the technology that should not have been able to produce it. Nancy Guthrie did not have an active Nest camera subscription. The camera mounted outside her home was technically disabled in terms of live recording. Law enforcement initially indicated there was no usable footage from the device, and then Google stepped in. Despite the lack of an active subscription, Google was able to pull data from its servers, fragments of information tied to that camera device, and from that data, reconstruct footage, not just from the night of February 1st, but from an earlier date, believed to be around January 11th. The same individual, identifiable by his gait, his build, his height, and notably the same clothing, was captured in that earlier footage, appearing to survey the property. This is not speculation. Multiple credible outlets and law enforcement adjacent sources have confirmed the existence of this footage. The individual seen on the night of the abduction and the individual seen weeks earlier appear to be the same person. Think about what that means. Weeks before Nancy Guthrie was taken, someone was already at her home. He was not there by accident. Criminologists and former law enforcement analysts have consistently noted in their assessments of this case that pre-surveillance is one of the clearest indicators of a planned, targeted abduction. This was not random. Analysts suggest the perpetrator knew who lived in that home, knew the layout, and was building an operational picture before executing whatever plan he had in mind. The flashlight detail is particularly telling. In the footage from the night of the abduction, the individual is seen with what appears to be a bite-style tactical flashlight clenched in his mouth, freeing both hands for use. Former investigators who have reviewed similar cases have noted that this kind of operational awareness, keeping hands free, minimizing contact points, controlling light without using hands, is not behavior associated with spontaneous crime. Someone trained this person, or this person trained themselves. Either way, it speaks to premeditation at a level that goes well beyond a crime of opportunity. One former detective cited in reporting from AOL and other outlets described the suspect's behavior as that of someone who clearly had a plan and called a specific detail in the footage weird in a way that suggested deliberate tactical discipline. That detail has not been fully disclosed publicly, which itself is telling. Law enforcement is holding something back, and based on the pattern of this investigation, that restraint appears to be intentional. Now let's talk about what investigators are holding, because the digital footprint in this case is enormous, even if the public picture is still incomplete. The cell tower situation around Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood is significant. According to reporting cited by former FBI digital forensics experts who have analyzed this case publicly, there are more than 40 cell towers within approximately a 3-mile radius of her home. That is a dense telecommunications environment, and it means that any device, any phone present in that area during the early morning hours of February 1st almost certainly left a trace. A retired FBI special agent with expertise in digital evidence described the process in detail. Investigators would conduct what is called a cell tower dump, collecting identifying data from every device that pinged those towers during a specific window of time. The data collected would include what is known as an IMSI, a unique identifier attached to a phone's SIM card. From there, investigators cross-reference subscriber records to attach identities to those signals. The challenge, and it is significant, is that a sophisticated actor would know to use a burner phone. A prepaid device purchased with cash leaves no direct subscriber trail. But even a burner phone pings cell towers. Even a burner phone leaves location data. And a burner phone still had to be bought somewhere. If there is any financial transaction attached to that purchase, any store camera footage, any point of connectivity, investigators can follow it. What the former agent highlighted as one of the most valuable angles in this case is the pattern of Google searches tied to Nancy Guthrie's property in the weeks before her disappearance. According to reporting across multiple outlets, there were dozens of searches for the property conducted from Arizona IP addresses in December, approximately 63 searches on December 5th, followed by 66 more on December 10th. Nancy was taken on February 1st. That is not coincidence. Analysts suggest this represents reconnaissance, digital surveillance conducted before physical surveillance. The same former FBI expert explained that even if those searches were conducted using throwaway email accounts, Google and similar platforms collect supplementary data, cookies, linked accounts, phone numbers associated with account creation, device fingerprints, all of which can lead investigators back to a real identity. It is slow work. It requires search warrants for each account, but it is workable. The legal process is one reason this investigation appears slower to the public than it actually is. Federal law enforcement cannot simply access private data without court authorization. Writing probable cause affidavits for dozens of individual search accounts takes time. Filing warrants takes time. Waiting for tech companies to comply takes time. None of this is visible to the public, which creates a dangerous illusion that nothing is happening. Former agents who have spoken on this case are clear. Something is almost certainly happening. It just cannot be seen yet. The DNA situation in this case has become one of the most discussed and most misunderstood elements of the entire investigation. Here is what we know. Biological material was collected from Nancy Guthrie's home. Some of it is being processed. The problem is not the absence of DNA, it is the complexity of what was found. Genetic genealogist C.C. Moore, one of the most respected names in forensic DNA work in the country, spoke publicly about this case and provided an unusually detailed breakdown of the challenge investigators are facing. She confirmed what insiders had already indicated. The DNA collected appears to be what is called a complex mixture. That means more than two individuals' genetic material is present in the same sample. A simple mixture, Nancy's DNA and one unknown male profile, would, in her assessment, already be solvable. The technology exists to deconvolute a two-person mixture with high reliability. But when you have a complex mixture, multiple unknown contributors, each representing a smaller proportion of the total sample, the science becomes significantly harder. Moore explained that the method used for genetic genealogy is fundamentally different from what law enforcement uses in traditional criminal databases. The genealogy profile relies on what are called SNP markers, single nucleotide polymorphisms, spread across hundreds of thousands of points in the genome. Deconvoluting a complex mixture to produce a usable SNP profile is an area of active scientific development. It has only been 8 years since genetic genealogy was first formally used in active law enforcement cases. What makes Moore's analysis particularly significant is her suggestion about where the technology may be heading. She indicated she had heard from insiders that new equipment specifically designed to assist with complex mixture deconvolution was being accelerated due in part to the attention this case has brought to the problem. She named a company called Estra as one potentially developing the software packages needed to push this forward. The possibility that contamination accounts for some of the complexity in that sample should not be dismissed. Moore raised it directly. A heavily touched surface, a doorknob, a countertop, a handrail could carry the DNA of multiple individuals, none of whom are the perpetrator. If that is the case, the sample may tell investigators less than hoped. But Moore was not pessimistic. She was deliberate. She said clearly, if a viable profile is extracted, the FBI genetic genealogy team is ready to work it within weeks. That team, she noted, has the resources and the experience to move quickly once they have a workable sample to upload to the relevant databases. She also raised something that deserves more attention than it has received publicly: the question of a second crime scene. Nancy Guthrie went somewhere after she left that house. She was either alive and held somewhere, or she was transported somewhere after death. Either scenario means another location exists where biological evidence may be present. The person who took her drove a vehicle. He held her somewhere. If investigators can identify that location, the DNA question may resolve itself independently of the complex mixture at the primary scene. There is a name that has come up repeatedly in coverage of this investigation, and it is not the suspect's name because that remains unknown. It is Sheriff Chris Nanos of the Pima County Sheriff's Office. The criticism directed at Nanos' handling of this investigation has been consistent, documented, and in some cases damaging. From the very first press conference, according to reporters and investigators who were on the ground in Tucson in those early days, the information being released to the public was inconsistent. Initial statements were walked back. A suspect image released publicly became the subject of internal dispute, with questions raised about whether a second image released alongside it was taken at the same time or represented a genuinely separate sighting. Sources close to the investigation indicated to reporters that early assumptions, specifically that Nancy may have been a vulnerable elderly person who wandered away, consumed critical hours that should have been spent treating the scene as what it appears to have been: a kidnapping. The crime scene tape came down before the FBI arrived. That detail has been reported across multiple outlets and has not been disputed. What that means practically is that a forensic window was closed prematurely. Footprints, trace evidence, electrostatic lift opportunities, gone. A forensic death investigator who analyzed the available evidence publicly made the point with painful clarity. The gridded surface visible near Nancy Guthrie's front door, broken naturally into sections by the walkway design, represented a ready-made crime scene grid for electrostatic shoe print analysis. Had the scene been preserved until the camera footage was recovered, footage that shows precisely where the suspect placed his feet, those prints might have been lifted. That opportunity no longer exists. The pizza delivery allegation adds another layer to the already complicated picture of scene management. According to reporting, the assertion has been made publicly that food was delivered to the active crime scene during the early stages of the response. Whether that claim is accurate in every detail is unverified, and this channel presents it as a reported allegation, not a confirmed fact. But the pattern it suggests, informality where formality was required, aligns with other documented concerns about how the initial hours were handled. The FBI's hostage rescue team flew in from Quantico and was reportedly waiting at a nearby airbase when the decision was made to move on a property in Rio Rico, a location investigators believed may have been connected to the case. According to sources cited in reporting, the sheriff's office moved before the HRT could reach the scene. What that decision cost in terms of evidence collection, coordination, or tactical effectiveness is not fully known publicly. But the HRT exists precisely for situations like this. Using them is the point. A recall effort against Sheriff Nanos was reportedly underway as of recent weeks, according to Nancy Grace's Crime Stories coverage. Whether that effort reflects community frustration with this specific case, broader dissatisfaction with his leadership, or both, the political environment surrounding the investigation adds pressure that cuts both ways. It can motivate resolution, or it can complicate the already delicate relationship between the sheriff's office and the federal agencies working alongside them. Sources cited across multiple outlets suggest that the FBI and the sheriff's office have found more functional working ground in recent weeks than they had in the earliest phase of the investigation. The rank and file, by most accounts, are working hard. The friction appears to have been at the leadership level. 62 days in, a journalist who had spent the week working sources in Tucson described what the desert west of that city actually looks like when you get off the main road. You drive for 15 minutes on a gravel surface that punishes every vehicle that uses it. The saguaro cacti, some of them 200 years old, stand taller than a person. The brush is dense and low in unexpected places. You can stand 25 feet from another human being in open desert and not see them, depending on how the light falls and where the scrub grows. Within a mile and a half of the main road, the terrain swallows everything. A former SWAT team commander who spent nearly 5 years supervising the Pima County Sheriff's Border Crime Unit described the area this way. Roads that used to function as corridors for human and drug smuggling. Areas where multiple homicide victims have been recovered. Locations where a serial killer, Christopher Clemens, disposed of his victims' bodies. The desert west of Tucson is not an abstract threat. It is a documented repository for violence that did not want to be found. This matters for one reason. It explains why desert searches for Nancy Guthrie were not the focus from early on. The former SWAT commander explained that unless you have specific information pointing to a specific location, searching that terrain is functionally impossible. It absorbs everything. It gives back nothing. And because of that, because the desert is so vast and so unforgiving, the only realistic early search window was around the immediate neighborhood. That search reportedly did happen in the first few days. What no one has confirmed publicly is whether it happened thoroughly enough, or whether the compromised state of the crime scene in those first hours affected the ability to read the evidence that might have pointed outward. The former commander offered one observation that lingers. If someone wanted to dispose of a person or a person's remains and had 45 minutes of uninterrupted time heading west out of Tucson, they could reach terrain that would not give up what it holds: potentially ever. That is not a comfortable thought. It is, however, a realistic one. And this case demands realism. Now for the part that most coverage of this case has circled without landing on, the question of who and how many. The individual captured on camera outside Nancy Guthrie's home is the only confirmed visual suspect in this case. One person on video, one image that has been made public. But multiple investigators and forensic analysts who have spoken to this case, not in connection with each other, across different programs and outlets, have arrived at a similar conclusion. This is almost certainly not a one-person operation. The reasoning is practical. Subduing and transporting an unwilling person, even an elderly person with limited mobility, is physically and logistically demanding. People fight. People resist. They grab, scratch, make noise, create complications. One person managing that while also navigating an unfamiliar house in the dark, monitoring a camera system they had already interfered with, and executing a clean exit. It is a lot for one individual to manage without error. And then there is the question of where Nancy went after she left that house. Someone had to have a vehicle ready. Someone had to be monitoring for law enforcement. Someone, perhaps, was waiting at a destination. The ransom note, the existence of which has been reported but whose full contents have not been verified, referenced a Bitcoin payment demand. That level of planning suggests either a very organized individual or a group. The searches conducted in December, dozens of them from multiple Arizona IP addresses, raised the same question. Were those searches conducted by one person moving between devices and locations, or were multiple people researching the same target from different positions? If investigators have been able to attach identities to even some of those search trails, they may already have answers that they are simply not sharing publicly. The ransom demand itself is analytically interesting. Cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin, was reportedly requested. A former assistant U.S. attorney and blockchain intelligence expert who analyzed the case publicly explained the mechanics. Money flowing into a ransom address is only the beginning of the trace. The critical moment comes when funds move to a cryptocurrency exchange for conversion to cash. At that point, the exchange holds real-world identity information, names, phone numbers, government ID, linked email addresses. That is where blockchain forensics becomes most powerful. The fact that the ransom demand specified Bitcoin suggests whoever designed this plan had at least some understanding of cryptocurrency, enough to believe it offered anonymity. Whether they understood how traceable that anonymity actually is in 2026 is another question. Former law enforcement analysts have noted that cryptocurrency-related ransom demands often reflect a false confidence in the perpetrator. The tools available to federal financial investigators, including agencies like the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, are significantly more advanced than what most criminal actors account for. If ransom funds moved, there may be a digital chain that leads directly to someone. There is a moment in Savannah Guthrie's Today Show interview that cuts through all the investigative detail and lands somewhere much more human. She talked about calling hospitals. Her sister had already called every hospital in the area. Savannah called them again anyway, because when the person you love is missing and no explanation makes sense, you do the thing that makes you feel like you are still doing something. You call the same hospitals. You ask the same questions. You stand very still in the middle of chaos and try to hold the walls up by sheer force of presence. Savannah Guthrie has returned to the Today Show in the weeks since her mother's disappearance. That decision, described by those close to her as a difficult one, reflects something that people who have not lived through a protracted missing persons case sometimes struggle to understand. Life does not pause for grief that has no clear ending. You cannot stay suspended indefinitely in the space between not knowing and knowing. You go back to work, you do the things your hands remember how to do, and you carry everything else underneath it every single hour. What Savannah has said publicly about the frustration of those early hours, the sense that investigators were not initially taking seriously the family's insistence that her mother could not have walked away, is consistent with what journalists and sources on the ground have reported independently. The family knew. Families always know. They know what their person can and cannot do, what their person would and would not do. And when that knowledge is not immediately received, when early investigative assumptions run counter to what the family is telling you clearly, that friction can become the thing that gets looked at years later when a case review asks where the first mistake happened. The theory currently circulating that Savannah may be privately coming to terms with the possibility that her mother is no longer alive has been reported as speculation based on anonymous sourcing. This channel presents it as exactly that. What is not speculative is the reality of what long-term missing persons cases do to families. The not knowing is its own particular cruelty. And for a family as visible as the Guthries, that experience is being lived publicly, in real time, in front of millions of people who see Savannah's face every morning and know exactly what she is carrying. Nancy Guthrie is described by everyone who knew her as a woman who was deeply loved and actively present in her community. She had regular visitors, she had a daughter nearby, she had a life that was full and connected. That is who was taken. Not just a statistic, not just a news story, not just a case number in a database. A person who was known and needed and is, by every account, desperately missed. As the investigation enters its third month, the key question isn't what went wrong, but what can still go right. There is still real hope. Authorities have surveillance footage, cell data, digital search records, DNA evidence, and possible financial trails. Each of these offers a path forward. The lack of updates doesn't mean no progress. It may reflect careful case building. Experts note that even complex DNA and digital evidence can lead to breakthroughs, especially with advanced tools like genetic genealogy and data analysis. This case isn't solved yet, but the foundation is strong. The evidence still exists. The suspect made mistakes, and investigators may be closer than it appears. Every piece of evidence is a door, and investigators may already have the keys. Here is where this stands. 10 weeks in, Nancy Guthrie is still missing. No arrest has been made. No suspect has been formally named. The Pima County Sheriff's Office and the FBI are operating as a joint task force that, by current reporting, is functioning more cohesively than it did in those critical early days, though the damage done in those first hours cannot be undone. What this case represents, beyond the immediate tragedy of one woman and one family, is a collision of everything that defines modern criminal investigation in America. The digital infrastructure that surrounds our daily lives, the evolving science of genetic genealogy that is rewriting what cold cases mean, the accountability questions that arise when local law enforcement handles a case that demands a federal-level response from the very first hour. And the very human truth that when something this wrong happens to someone this visible, the entire country watches. And that watching creates its own kind of pressure. The Guthrie family is living in a space that no family should have to occupy for this long. The community in Tucson has watched their neighborhood become the center of a national conversation about public safety, investigative competence, and what it means when the people responsible for protecting your community fall short at the moment it matters most. And Savannah Guthrie gets up every morning and goes to work, because that is what you do when the alternative is drowning. If you have information about this case, contact the FBI tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI. A reward of more than $1 million has been offered. Your tip could be the thread that unravels everything, and you can remain anonymous. If this video gave you something real, a clearer picture, a deeper understanding, a reason to keep paying attention, share it. Like it. Subscribe to the True Crime Report, where we do not do surface level. We do not do filler. We go wherever the evidence leads, and we bring you with us. Nancy Guthrie has not been forgotten. This case will not go cold while we are still here asking questions. I am Sandra. This is the True Crime Report. Thank you for watching.